Don't let anybody make you think that God chose America as his divine messianic force to be a sort of policeman of the whole world. God has a way of standing before the nations with judgment, and it seems that I can hear God saying to America, you are too arrogant. And if you don't change your ways, I will rise up and break the backbone of your power.
Hotep, which in the language of ancient Egypt means we come with justice in peace. Welcome to Freedom Now, a Saturday Pan-Africanist and Internationalist World Affairs program. Freedom Now is committed to the principle of the rights of all peoples and nations to self-determination. We thank you deeply for your contribution to KPFK, which permits programs like Freedom Now to stay on the air. In this era of corporate acquisition and co-optation of all dissident media, we provide the microphone, challenging their corporate and racist point of view. So stay tuned for Agenda here at Freedom Now.
Fellas, I'm ready to get up and do my thing. I want to get into it, man, you know.
I'll play the blues for you. How you feel now?
Peace, hoteps, and wisdom to all of our faithful and devoted listeners out there in the radio verse. This is Brother Brandon Sankara, and I want to start things off with a thank you to all of you listeners out there who continue to support Freedom Now. You keep us on our mission and allow us to bring you our agenda for today, Saturday, June 29th, 2024. We begin with our dear ancestor and Freedom Now founder, Baba Didan Kamati, bringing us some of that African drumbeat historical calendar for the week to remind us that every day is a day in African history. Then, author, historian, and professor of African American Studies at the University of Houston and Freedom Now co-producer Dr. Gerald Horne will be joined on the line by Daniel Immerwahr, Bergen Evans Professor in the Humanities at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. He is also the author of a December 2023 article in the Journal of American History titled Burning Down the House: Slavery and Arson in America. After that, the second half of our program will kick off with Dr. Gerald Horne, who's going to be joined on the line by Karlos Hill, Regents Associate Professor of the Clara Luper Department of African and African American Studies at the University of Oklahoma. He is also the co-author of the book, The Murder of Emmett Till, A Graphic History. Now, I'm going to be on the ones and twos as we pour this knowledge, making sure that your mental cup runneth over with revolutionary wisdom right here to quench that mental thirst on Freedom Now, KPFK 90.7 FM in Los Angeles, and kpfk.org streaming live on the web. To make sure that we stay on the smooth ride with that cultural vibe you know and love, we'll be enjoying a musical bottom featuring Albert King, Art Blakey, McCoy Tyner, Grover Washington Jr., Arthur Blythe, and Roger Kellaway. Now people get ready for this train to come in, taking you one step closer to mental liberation, and stay tuned for that beat of the historical drum, followed by an interview with Dr. Gerald Horne and Daniel Immerwahr.
Hotep, this is Didan Kamati with the African Drumbeat Historical Calendar, where we praise up the righteous struggles of Africans and all oppressed peoples against systems of oppression. June 30th, 1520, Hernando Cortez's Spanish army is routed and defeated in the first attempt to conquer the Aztec Empire of the Americas. This victory is known in history as the La Noche Triste. July 2nd, 1848, Africans rebel in St. Croix, forcing the Dutch governor to abolish slavery in the Danish West Indies. St. Croix today is one of the U.S. colonies of the Virgin Isles. July 2nd, 1925, Patrice Lumumba, the first democratically elected Prime Minister of the Republic of the Congo, was born. Patrice Lumumba led the national movement of the Congo to independence from Belgian colonial rule. Within 10 weeks after declaring that the wealth of the Congo would be nationalized to provide the capital to build social, educational, and employment infrastructure for the people of the Congo, after 400 years of colonial underdevelopment, the United States and Belgian intelligence agencies organized his assassination and the installation of a dictator, Mobutu. July 2nd, 1964, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed, which outlawed segregation in public places and employment. Driven by the Civil Rights Movement, the bill was amended prior to passage to protect women and explicitly included white people for the first time. July 3rd, 1981, Africans living in Brixton, England, rise up in urban rebellions against police brutality and racism. July 3rd, 1835, rebel children strike at the clothing factories in Paterson, New Jersey. Children workers in the textile factories received 16 cents per day or $2.70 per week. They, the children, demanded an increase of 5 cents per day and an 11-hour workday and a 6-day work week. They were refused and they struck, leading the adults into a general strike against the large linen thread industry of the United States. July 3rd, 1988, the United States guided missile cruiser, the USS Vincennes, shoots down an Iranian commercial airline, killing 290 civilian passengers and crew members while inside Iranian territorial waters. Neither apologies nor reparations were ever provided to the Iranians. July 4th, 1930, the Nation of Islam, the largest black organization in the United States, was founded by Master Fard Muhammad. The Nation of Islam, a continuation of the dual trends of spiritual and political resistance which has characterized the history of Africans in the United States. One trend, liberation theology, whether Islam, Christianity, Rastafarianism, has been used as a spiritual weapon by Africans to sustain their resistance to the system of slavery, segregation, and integration. The other trend, political resistance, as demonstrated by the black nationalist character of the Nation of Islam, best articulated by Malcolm X, is a merger of the spiritual liberation of politics with the political liberation. July 4th, 1975, the George Jackson Brigade, a European collective in Seattle, Washington, named after the San Quentin prison Black Panther Party leader George Jackson, begins a reign of revolutionary violence. Based in Washington, they conduct bank robberies, bombings against the custom homes, court buildings, public utilities, and correctional facilities on behalf of sparking a revolution in the United States and to show solidarity with the black liberation struggle. July 4th, 1833, Edmona Wildfire Lewis was born. She was an artist and a revolutionary organizer of Africans who was of Cherokee ancestry, who sculptured anti-slavery crusaders such as John Brown in allegorical sculptures. She was an Underground Railroad activist, helping to smuggle Africans to freedom from slavery. She believed that the role of the artist was to be in the front line of the struggle for justice. July 5th, 1961, the country of Algeria in North Africa gains independence after an 8-year guerrilla war, where over 1 million Africans from Algeria sacrificed their lives for freedom from French colonial rule. This heroic struggle created such world-renowned revolutionaries such as Frantz Fanon and Ahmed Ben Bella. This epic war has been recreated in the classic film The Battles of Algiers, now available on DVD. Please join us in the chant of Amandala Awetu, which is the freedom cry of the peoples of South Africa, meaning real power belongs to the people. All power to the people.
For KPFK Pacifica Radio in Los Angeles, this is Gerald Horne, and with me on the line is Daniel Immerwahr, Bergen Evans Professor in the Humanities at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, and author of the article in the December 2023 Journal of American History entitled Burning Down the House, Slavery and Arson in America. Thank you for joining us on Freedom Now, KPFK Los Angeles, Daniel Immerwahr.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here.
And it's a pleasure to have you. So why did you write this article, Burning Down the House?
I got really interested in fire as a sort of problem in U.S. history. I live in Chicago, which is, talks incessantly about its Great Fire when the whole city burned down in 1871. There was also another in 1874. And the more I kind of thought about it, the more I realized that that's not a totally unusual thing. The United States, for most of its history, was, unlike other countries, really built out of wood, just because it had so many trees. And as a result, it had, what observers noted to be an alarming number of fires. So, as I was kind of thinking through our own fires today and global warming, I got really interested in the problem. And I started to realize that there's a really complex history there, not just about, things burning down, but the possibility of intentionally burning down things. And I got really interested in the question, which has bedeviled historians for a while, of whether enslaved people purposefully burned down, the buildings of slaveholders. You can kind of see it both ways. On the one hand, it's totally plausible, given the rate of fires in general, that white people just blamed every fire on black people and used it as an excuse to torture and sometimes kill them. I find that plausible. But you can also find the other thing plausible, that in a combustible environment, slaves used that as a weapon of the weak to lash out at their masters, and did so quite effectively.
Now, speaking of weapons of the weak, are there any gender components with regard to the accused arsonists?
Yeah, so there's a lot. Basically, white people were constantly accusing black people of setting fires. And the tricky thing is that black people almost never confess to doing it except under duress. We have about 300 slave narratives, and there's only one of them that has a sort of unambiguous confession to setting a fire. So we're going a lot on hearsay, but one thing that's really interesting about fire setting, as opposed to, seizing a rifle or marching on a building, is that it can be done by women who had frequent access to fires. And so that was certainly one of the senses in the accusations, was that not only were slaves setting fires, but women were setting fires, enslaved women were setting fires, and a number of the enslaved people who were punished and often executed for setting fires were women.
Any percentages that you're aware of?
We can't really do that, and the reason that we can't do that is because even when people are convicted or executed for setting fires, it's really hard to know if they actually did it. Fire sort of destroys its own evidence, so I can give you a sense of the rumors are that a lot of women are doing it, but we can't give a sort of percentage breakdown in that way, just because of the sort of fog of uncertainty that surrounds arson.
Now, what about the burning of the Confederate White House. When did that
Yeah.
take place, and were enslaved Africans implicated?
Yeah, so I said that it's almost always hard to figure out if a fire was really slave set or if it was accidental. There are a few exceptions to that, and one of them is so amazing, and I can't believe historians aren't talking about it all the time. In 1864, in the middle of the Civil War, Jefferson Davis, who's the president of the Confederacy, he has an enslaved workforce, and his servants, enslaved servants, set a fire in the Confederate White House while the Davises are there. And so this is not only sort of an assassination attempt on the Confederate president, but, it could have had massive implications for the war. I have to say could have, because the fire is discovered in its fairly early stages and extinguished. But because the fire is discovered, the sort of trail of combustibles that, was supposed to lead to the, larger rooms and set the whole thing on fire was also discovered. So in a way that doesn't usually happen with fires. And that made it quite clear to everyone that this was arson. So in the midst of the Civil War, enslaved people try their best to assassinate Jefferson Davis.
I assumed that they were captured and executed.
You assume things are quickly breaking apart for the sort of slavery order during the Civil War, and one of the other weapons of the week that slaves have newly available to them is just running away and kind of trusting that the old systems of repression are no longer capable of catching them. And so right after the fire, a number of, they call them servants, but a number of slaves in the Confederate White House just immediately took off.
So how does George Washington fit into your story?
I did this thing. So once I got really interested in the question of whether slaves were setting fire, and I started to suspect, reading stories like the one in the Confederate White House, that this really was something that was happening, not just something that black people were getting scapegoated for. I just went through the major slaveholders, like the ones you've heard of, the Thomas Jeffersons, George Washingtons, Jefferson Davis. And I just asked, were there suspicious fires in your past, in Monticello, at Mount Vernon? And the answer is, absolutely yes, in nearly every case. And so in George Washington's, it is really remarkable. So Washington, in his letters, complains that slaves are careless about fire, and he keeps worrying that they're going to sort of set fires. And he's a little unsure if they are doing it accidentally or on purpose. There are numerous fires at Mount Vernon that raise Washington's antenna, and he sort of feels like they're set on purpose. But one of the most menacing things about arson is that it's actually really hard to tell what's on purpose and what's not. So Washington becomes quite paranoid, and he gets particularly interested in this one enslaved worker called Isaac, and he's like, I really think he's doing it, but I'm not totally sure, and I don't exactly know how to react. So that's the kind of general haze, I think, in which a lot of enslavers live, because of the fear of fire. But the sequel is really astonishing. So Washington dies, and in his will, one of the sort of most famous acts that he does is he wills the humans that he owns to be emancipated. And so that's kind of part of the argument for Washington is, yes, he owned slaves, but he was enlightened in that way. But there was a sort of trick in the will, which is that he had the slaves be emancipated after the death of his wife, Martha, so they could still be of service to her. So, emancipation, but with some delay. What he did not foresee was that in conditioning their liberty to her life, he was essentially putting out a warrant on her head. Anyone who can kill Martha Washington, suddenly, 123 people get to be free. And suddenly Mount Vernon just starts having a lot of fires. So many fires that two things happen. One is that Dolly Madison becomes unwilling to visit the flame-harried plantation because she's like, it is too dangerous to go to Mount Vernon. They'll just burn it down at any point. And Martha Washington gets so nervous that she says, okay, I understand that these slaves are not supposed to be free until I'm dead. However, I also understand the sort of incentive structure that has been created by this will. So she hastens to free those slaves immediately, just to sort of break that possibility. Although she still owns slaves who are not part of the Washington emancipation, and they keep setting fires in Mount Vernon too.
Now, John C. Calhoun may be known to some in our audience. He was a prominent U.S. politician before the U.S. Civil War from South Carolina, a major advocate of slavery, to put it mildly. How does he fit into your story?
Yeah, so John C. Calhoun is, U.S. historians kind of think of him as like the worst, not in what he did, but just sort of offering some of the most forthright racist defenses of slavery, and being really kind of a lodestar for like the, slavery should still exist position. So I wondered, did he have fires too? He didn't talk about them, but if you look in his letters, what you realize is there is a moment when an enslaved young woman named Isi takes a coal, sort of like a hot coal that's still burning, and puts it under the pillow of his son. That also is a murder attempt, an assassination attempt, and something that could have torched the entire house. It's caught in time. She's, punished. But it's a really difficult matter for the Calhouns because they don't want to talk about it, because they don't want to give other slaves ideas. So we only have the letter because it's sort of written in between the family where they talk about it, and they say, burn this letter after you read it. This is information that cannot be brought to light. Luckily, the letter wasn't burned, so we have some information about this kind of attempted murder in the Calhoun household.
So what do you infer from the high rates of arson in Charleston, South Carolina, a city with a large Black population?
Yeah, so let's talk about Charleston. So generally, slavery and cities don't go together in U.S. history very well. Most of the slavery is sort of typical slavery that you think of as plantation slavery, and that's happening in a rural area. One reason why it becomes hard to enslave people in cities is precisely because cities are really fire prone, and enslaved people can do an enormous amount of damage there. But there are two cities, Charleston and New Orleans, which are ports. So enslaved people are sort of brought in and sold, and they become places where Charleston has the largest proportion of Black people and largest proportion of slaves of all the U.S. cities, and New Orleans has the largest number. So Charleston is basically, the capital of American slavery. That's what two historians call it. And it's unsurprisingly also basically a capital of fire. It is where the first fire insurance map is made. It is where the first fire insurance company in North America is founded, and it is enormously fire prone. So, I kind of wondered how fire prone, and I used a 19th century fire census to crunch the numbers and to compare Charleston to other cities of similar size with few or no slaves. And it turns out that Charleston suffers 4 times the damage from large fires than they do at a similar time, which, strongly suggests that of the many fires that Charleston suffered, quite a lot of them were not accidental, as they were in its counterpart cities. Quite a lot of them were slave set.
Now, you mentioned Thomas Jefferson a moment or two ago, and I think you mentioned fires at his estate in Virginia. And of course, he's notorious for the statement associating enslavement of Africans with a so-called fire bell in the night. And you tend to suggest that that's more than just a metaphor. Yeah,
that is like you'll see that in every history textbook. Jefferson, the far-seeing founder, he had slaves. In fact, he enslaved his own children. Let's just say that part out loud too. But he also recognized the political danger of slavery. So that's part of the, he saw it correctly, even if he was a bit of a hypocrite, is usually how that line of defense goes. And one thing he says, which is quite striking and prescient in 1820, during a moment when political arguments about slavery are coming up and starting to take on a sectional character between North and South, Jefferson says, this is going to ruin the country. These debates about slavery ring in my ears like a fire bell in the night. So that's the famous line. And historians constantly quote that line. It's such a sort of nice literary line that it's hard not to. But they rarely ask, wait, what's he actually talking about? What does he mean, fire bell? And what I discovered when I just went through all the famous slaveholders and asked where were the fires in your past was that that line is delivered in 1820. In 1819, there had been a rash of fires, not just at his main plantation, Monticello, but at a number of neighboring ones too, which means that they're not happening naturally. It's just like something is setting fires in all of them. 3 planters are killed. Jefferson is injured in the fire at his estate. It seems really hard to imagine that these are not slave set. And so when Jefferson talks about, the greatest danger he can imagine, and he names fire, he's thinking about something real because he'd been injured in a fire the year before. And, he doesn't, in his letters at any point attribute, say who was setting the fires. This is part of the kind of code of silence around this. But it seems pretty clear that he's thinking about, if we talk too much about this, not just we have to argue in the Senate, but we might put a word in the ear of slaves, and they might rise up and end slavery for themselves with the torch.
Now, do you have any comparisons of arson in Caribbean and or South America vis-a-vis the United States?
Yeah. So basically slaveholders are nervous about arson all the time, and they talk about it constantly. And one of the things that's really on their mind is when they look to the Caribbean, where there'd been slave revolts that were far larger than the ones that we are usually used to talking about in North America. Most famous one was the slave revolt in Saint-Domingue that led to the independence of Saint-Domingue and its establishment as a country called Haiti. But there are major revolts throughout the Caribbean and places like Jamaica. And in those cases, it is just so clear all of those revolts are attended by arson. There's just massive fires, and not just sort of one person lights a match fire and then, a lot of things burns, but just constant reignition because rebels understand that the way to overthrow slavery is to literally sort of burn the whole thing down. So that's another sort of symbolic layer when slaveholders in the United States think about fire. They are fully aware of how bad it can get because all they have to do is look to the Caribbean and see not only sort of the danger of dispossession and some real violence that could come with fire, but enough that it had actually ended slavery in much of the Caribbean, because that's one of the main impetuses for the ending of British slavery and the ending of French slavery in those colonies.
Finally, Professor Daniel Immerwahr of Northwestern University, author of an article in the December 2023 Journal of American History, Burning Down the House, Slavery and Arson in America. As I recall, the last line of your article is, quote, "Some things cannot be fixed, they must be burned." What did you mean by that?
Well, so I kind of wondered what it meant to burn something, right? Because we don't have the evidence. No one says, I burned this city or plantation and this is what I meant by it. You get punished so harshly if you talk in public about that kind of thing. So we kind of have to infer, what does it mean to rise up in this particular way? And one of the interesting things about fire is it's indiscriminate, right? A fire doesn't clearly target just the cruel enslaver and then, save the young child who also lives in the same building. Fire is a kind of radical critique in its material properties. And so we can't be sure exactly what people meant when they picked up a torch, but I think we can see a kind of affinity between that mode of protest and a kind of criticism that's not just, I wish this law were slightly different, I wish someone understood this, but, everything is so wrong that I feel like all I can do is burn it all down and hope something new will come from the ashes.
Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Professor Immerwahr of Northwestern University, author of an article in the December 2023 Journal of American History entitled Burning Down the House, Slavery and Arson in America. Thank you for joining us on Freedom Now, KPFK, Los Angeles.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, so I guess we're finished. Thank you very much. That was very good.
Yeah, that was fun. Thanks for doing this. I really appreciate you reading the article.
We're going to broadcast the next week or two, and I'll let you know when.
Okay, great. Appreciate it.
All right, good luck to you.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye-bye.
This is Sister Flora, and you are listening to Freedom Now at KPFK 90.7 FM in occupied Mexico, including Los Angeles, 98.7 FM Santa Barbara, 93.7 FM in San Diego, and streaming live on the web at kpfk.org. Today's program, as well as 10 prior editions, can be reheard at kpfk.org/audio archive, and scroll down to Freedom Now. From 12 to 1 p.m., following Freedom Now is our sister Assumpta, with Spotlight Africa addressing issues facing Mother Africa. For a truly alternative international perspective on world affairs, check out RTTV Russia, CCTV China, and online at Presna, Latina Cuba Telesur Venezuela, News 24 South Africa, and Press TV Iran.
Welcome back here to Freedom Now. We're going to keep this train moving and send you right back on over to Dr. Gerald Horne, who's now being joined by Professor Karlos Hill. Take it away, Dr. Horne.
For KPFK Pacifica Radio, this is Gerald Horne, and with me on the line is Karlos Hill, Regents Associate Professor of the Clara Luper Department of African American Studies and advisor to the President for Community Engagement at Oklahoma University in Norman, Oklahoma, and co-author of the book The Murder of Emmett Till, A Graphic History. Thank you for joining us on Freedom Now, KPFK Pacifica Radio. Karlos Hill.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining us. So, who was Emmett Till, and why did you decide to write a book about him?
Well, let me start with who is Emmett Till. Emmett Till is and was a beautiful young Black boy who was 14 years old in 1955, in August of 1955, when he traveled from Chicago, where his mother, Mamie Till, and he lived. He traveled from Chicago in the summer of 1955 to Money, Mississippi, where Mamie Till's relatives lived, and where Till was going to stay for 2 weeks. And during that 2 weeks in August of 1955, and really only about 3 to 4 days after Till arrived, is when Till and his cousins, Wheeler Parker, Simeon Parker, they went to the grocery store the small grocery store in Money, Mississippi, owned by the Bryant family. And it's there that Emmett Till draws the undue attention of Caroline Bryant. She screams and she yells in response to Emmett Till, whistling in her direction. And that whistle at Caroline Bryant at the at the meat market, the Bryant meat market, that is what creates the situation where Emmett Till, only a few days later, is kidnapped by Roy Bryant, the husband of Carolyn Bryant, as well as J.W. Milam, his half-brother. They kidnap Emmett Till from the home of Mose Wright, who he's living with, his relative, and they interrogate him in a barn. They ultimately brutally murder him. But what they do in August of 1955 is what white Southerners typically didn't do after they've, killed or tried to brutalize a Black person. These two, J.W. Milam and Roy Bryant, they in fact try to hide Emmett Till's murder. They try to hide their involvement in the case by weighing him down with 100 or 75-pound gin fan, throw his body in the Tallahatchie River in hope that no one ever hears anything of Emmett Till, but in fact, that doesn't happen. Emmett Till's body resurfaces, and the one of the most important criminal cases, legal cases of the 20th century occurs in Money, Mississippi, around who were the killers of Emmett Till, and bringing them to justice. And, in more than 65 years, later, Emmett Till still hasn't gained, or his family has received justice for what happened to him so many years ago.
So in other words, the perpetrators were not convicted.
They went free, even though they murdered Emmett Till, and even though a few months after the trial, they all but admitted that they had killed Emmett Till in a Look magazine article from January 1956. And so the murderers of Emmett Till knew that they could not be tried again for his murder. And so in their Look magazine interview tell-all, they basically say in as many words that they were the two individuals that took Emmett Till's life. We know that from historical research and from the recent documentaries. Keith Beauchamp is probably the main one, but Stanley Nelson's documentary as well played a really important role in helping the world understand that it wasn't just J.W. Milam and Roy Bryant who murdered Emmett Till, but in fact there had been a conspiracy. There had been a larger conspiracy involving Caroline Bryant and others that ultimately led to Emmett Till being kidnapped, again interrogated, brutally beaten, and then body disposed of by throwing it or trying to dispose of it by weighing his body down with a 75-pound gin fan and throwing it into the Tallahatchie River. So those were the narratives that began to percolate in the last, I would say the last decade, beginning in 2013-14. And those new narratives that have shined a bigger light on the possible individuals who participated, that has came by way of the documentaries. And for people like me who study Emmett Till and who are really trying to not just study him and to relate who he was in the classroom, but we're really interested, and I'm really interested in bearing witness to Emmett Till for the sake of justice, not just now for Emmett Till, but it's the community of activists, right, and family members who have fought so hard over the years to get some level, some measure of either symbolic justice or tangible justice for Emmett Till and the community that supports him.
Now, understand that one of the many reasons why the murder of Emmett Till became a national, if not an international issue, was the fact that when he had his funeral in Chicago, there was an open casket, and the sight of his disfigured body was startling to many, and in fact appeared in Jet magazine, a popular Negro weekly of that era. Is that accurate?
Yes. If we talk about why Emmett Till is remembered today, it is the iconic photograph of his disfigured face and the open casket funeral, the photograph from the open casket funeral at the Roberts Temple Church in Chicago in September of 1955. Yes, it's that photo that the world saw and was outraged. It was that photo that sent shockwaves around the world, that a 14-year-old black child had been brutalized to the point that you could not even recognize him. And so that photo is responsible truly for outraging Black America and really galvanizing Black America. We talk about the 1955 era as Emmett Till generation for a reason. The people who saw that photograph of that open casket of Emmett Till lying in that open casket at Roberts Temple Church, September of 1955, the children who saw that photograph, the adults who saw that photograph, the adults who were at that funeral were forever changed. And they said to themselves, after seeing that photo, never again. That's the Emmett Till generation. And Mamie Till, Emmett Till's mother, made the fateful decision to allow his casket, to allow the funeral to be an open casket funeral, because she was really pushed to do a closed casket funeral because others wanted the world's last memory of Emmett Till to be the beautiful boy that he was. But she decided, even in her grief, that she needed the world to see what they had done to her boy. She needed the world to see his disfigured face, what Mississippi and Mississippi white supremacy had done to her boy and to her boy's face. And that faithful decision is what allowed the world to see and what propelled the Emmett Till generation to in 1955 set out to begin the modern American civil rights movement. And we can trace that right I was going to say Ida B. Wells, but we certainly can trace it back to Ida B. Wells. But in terms of the modern civil rights movement, we can trace it to Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott, and how Emmett Till's and the memory of Emmett Till only a few months earlier was at the forefront of Rosa Parks' mind and intentionality when she refuses to give up her seat. And so Rosa Parks, we can see as a part of the Emmett Till generation, of those Black people who saw that photograph, who witnessed that open casket funeral and said, never again.
Now, there was a recent movie, a Hollywood movie, if I may, about Emmett Till. I think the title was Till. Are you familiar with that movie, and do you have an opinion about it?
Yes, sir. I am familiar with that film, and I think it has done tremendous work educating a new generation about who Emmett Till is, and why he's so important. What's so important about the film from my vantage point is I'm someone who prides myself on doing work in relationship to victims, survivors, and descendants. And as a historian, I'm always trying to center in my telling of the history, in my lecturing about the history, I'm always trying to center the voices of victims, survivors, and descendants. And that's what the Till film does. It centers Mamie Till's voice and vision for who Emmett Till was and his murder, and in the aftermath, right? What we did in response and what she did in response to his murder. The reason why it's such a great film for this generation is it really centers Mamie Till's memory of Emmett. And that's something that for all of the scholarship there is on Emmett Till and all the books on Emmett Till, I believe the most important understandings are those of his mother, those of Simeon Parker, those of a Wheeler Parker, because those are the actual people who knew him best. Those are the people who can more authentically represent him, especially since Till was killed so early at 14 years old. He didn't even have the opportunity to truly leave his mark on history. And so the only thing that we have to allow us to get as close to his voice as we can are his family, are his loved ones. And so it was such a positive development to see a feature film, the first and maybe the only one for a while on Emmett Till, be centered on Mamie's memory and help the world educate the world about why Emmett Till was such a beautiful young man who tragically was taken from us.
Now, false testimony plays a role in your text, Professor Hill. How so?
Well, let's just say my book, The Murder of Emmett Till, that was published in 2020, that book was, the spark of that book came about from new evidence, new information that was gained from 2 to 3 year FBI investigation beginning in 2004, but then ended in about 2006. This 2-year FBI investigation produced thousands and thousands of pages of new information about the Till case. One of the pieces of information from that investigation was that there had been many, not just 2 people who were involved, there were many potential co-conspirators. And so that new insight led me, as well as other researchers on Emmett Till's life and legacy, to begin to pour through them. What I discovered, and what many others discovered, is not just that there had been other potential co-conspirators, but there was also a court transcript. So for the first time in so many years, we could look at the actual trial transcript and who said what. And one of the things that getting access to that trial transcript revealed is that Carolyn Bryant actually did go on the record and say that Emmett Till, when he walked inside of that that grocery store in Money, Mississippi, in August of 1955, she went on record when they were on trial that he assaulted her, that he accosted her when he walked in, that he actually propositioned her sexually. And that led her to scream when in fact he walked outside and he whistled at her. That was the context. What we have learned later, is that she did say it, but that it did not happen. And also we learned that in 2017, there was an alleged interview between her and Timothy Tyson in which she said that Emmett Till never did anything to deserve what the fate that he got. We know based on investigative reporting now that interview did not happen, and so Carolyn Bryant didn't in fact have any remorse for what happened to Emmett Till. And so in my book I gesture at that, but we've come to find out later that in fact that is not true. And so there are so many things in the Till case that are still unsettled. And that just speaks to the travesty of this case. Why has it taken this long to hold people accountable for things that we know they were responsible for and participated in?
So just to clarify, you're saying that this heavily reported interview that Timothy Tyson did with Caroline Bryant, that she didn't say what he said that she said?
She did not say any of what he alleged she said.
So he made it up? I mean,
he made it up. This is what can be clearly established from what she has said, she said in talking with him. Just based on that alone, we know that what was reported initially in 2017, the blood of Emmett Till, was not factually correct. And even if what she said to him in 2017 when he interviewed her, even if she said it in some garbled way, near her death, and when she was interviewed near to her death, she denied ever saying anything remotely close to what Timothy Tyson said that she did. So based on those things, we can say it was not true.
Well, I would like, if I had time, to follow up, but let us move on. What are poll taxes and literacy tests, and what role did they play in Jim Crow Mississippi?
Poll taxes and literacy tests were a part of the infrastructure of Jim Crow segregation. Jim Crow segregation was about denying Black people the possibility of being a citizen, not even offering them second-class citizenship, just not allowing Black people to have any, even a modicum of citizenship rights, participation in American democracy. So when we talk about literacy tests, they were tests given by local electors to establish whether one was intellectually fit for citizenship. And so one way to demonstrate intellectual fitness was, could one read a passage from, let's say, the Mississippi Constitution or the Alabama Constitution, any section chosen by that local elector representative. And if you could not satisfy them, your ability to both read and understand said section of the Mississippi or Alabama statutes, Constitution, then you could be deemed by that elector to be unfit, intellectually unfit, because one can't read and interpret, understand, and therefore you could be blocked from voting. The same with poll taxes. In America, we've graduated, I hope. I don't know of any cases currently from forcing people to pay a tax for the privilege of voting, right? A kind of a fee, a service fee for the privilege of voting in counties and throughout the Deep South, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, but also Texas and a slew of other states, Georgia, South Carolina. We can name all of the Confederacy, the states of the Confederacy, that in one way or another employ literacy tax or poll taxes, those like a surcharge for voting, and for poor Black people, particularly poor Black Southerners in the rural Deep South where I am from, where that represented a poll tax of $1.50, $2 represented a week's worth of work. It really stymied, because of economic desperation, it could stymie, or one of the tools that was used to stymie Black voting in the South. And so in Mississippi, in particular in the Mississippi Delta, where Emmett Till would have visited, literacy tests and poll taxes were a 1-2 punch, along with racial violence and terror to prevent Black people from voting.
Finally, Professor Hill, co-author of the book, The Murder of Emmett Till, A Graphic History, would you recommend to the youth in our audience that they pursue graduate or undergraduate study in Norman, Oklahoma at OU?
I would most definitely encourage them to study in graduate school, or even undergraduate, for that matter. OU is a great school. University of Oklahoma is a great school. I know it to be a great school because I work with the faculty and the students. But I would say being at the University of Oklahoma for the last 8 years has been an opportunity for me to get proximate with some of the most important Black history in our country, the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre, as well as the 1958 Catch drugstore sit-in that led to a 6-year-long sit-in movement in Oklahoma City that spilled over to other parts of the country, being in Oklahoma has allowed me to bear witness to those things. And so I think for students who really are interested in history, really interested in the modern world and getting involved and trying to make a difference, besides being a great academic institution, OU is a place where you can really get involved and make a difference in the community. I've been afforded the opportunity to do that. I would love to see more young people doing that as well.
Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, Professor Hill, Regents Associate Professor of the Clara Luper Department of African American Studies at Oklahoma University in Norman, Oklahoma, and co-author of the book, The Murder of Emmett Till, A Graphic History. Thank you for joining us on Freedom Now, KPFK, Los Angeles.
And thank you again for having me, Brother Horne.
But being friendly and being a friend, I think, are two different things. I think there are many whites who act friendly toward Negroes. A fox acts friendly toward the lamb. And usually the fox is the one who ends up with the lamb chop on his plate. The wolf doesn't act friendly, and therefore the wolf has more difficulty in getting the lamb chop in his plate.
I'd like to point out, though, that...
I say that because it is usually if you study the structure of the Negro community, economically, politically, civically, psychologically, and otherwise, it's controlled by the white liberal, who usually poses as the friend of the Negro, who actually differs from the white conservative in the same way that the fox differs from the wolf. Their appetite is the same. Their motives are the same. It's only their mannerisms and methods that differ.
In closing, we'd like to thank our guests, starting with Daniel Immerwahr from Northwestern University. Find his December 2023 article in the Journal of American History titled Burning Down the House, Slavery and Arson in America. Next up, we thank Karlos Hill for joining us today and encourage our listeners to find his book, The Murder of Emmett Till, A Graphic History. Shout out to Dr. Gerald Horne for doing what he does best and guiding this train of mental liberation towards Pan-African enlightenment for yet another Saturday. Hit up your favorite bookstore right now and find one of Dr. Horne's many informative texts to enrich that library of yours as well as your mind. Word to producer Sister Tej. Much love to our spiritual backbone and ancestor Baba Didan Kamati for giving us the African drumbeat historical calendar for the week. Abundant thanks to our marvelous engineer, and last but certainly not least, thanks to all of our loyal listeners and supporters out there. It takes a village to build a revolution, and Freedom Now is a village to be reckoned with. This has been Brother Brandon Sankara, and you can join us on Facebook at Freedom Now Gerald Horne. You can email the program at freedomnow@kpfk.org or go to the audio archives on kpfk.org. Scroll down to find Freedom Now, and you'll be able to hear this program as well as 60 days worth of prior programming here at KPFK 90.7 FM. We now send you off to our sister Assumpta with Spotlight Africa, coming up next addressing issues facing Mama Africa. And until next Saturday, here at Freedom Now, we stand running our marathon, ready for revolution.